Good afternoon, good late afternoon to some of you joining us. Good morning to some of you joining us on the West Coast. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council, and welcome to today's In-Service podcast series event. The In-Service podcast is a series of podcasts that we've been generating now for a couple years, featuring some of the most innovative thinkers across our community platform. And I'm super excited for today's discussion built around this title of The Bold New Frontier CX for 2025 and Beyond. We were talking and planning that it has something to do maybe with Star Trek at some point, and we kind of frame this as a futuristic discussion to look a little bit forward and look at what our next practice is and how do we meet the customer where they want to be met and those evolving customer expectations. I am so incredibly pleased to be joined by Chris Dexter. He is the Vice President of Customer Experience of Cisco. Chris, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, John. Great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Outstanding. Before we jump in, I just wanted to remind our listening guests, some of you we see, hello, from LinkedIn. We're publishing live here, broadcasting live on LinkedIn Live, so thank you for joining us. If you'd like to get involved in the discussion, we encourage you to comment, chat, ask questions, react, and we'll try and build that into our stream here. If you want to revisit this podcast as a resource, which I would encourage you to do because it's going to be very rich in content, you can find it on our website, on our social pages, via LinkedIn, and on any of the podcast platforms that you subscribe to, Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and any others. It will be broadcast and streamed everywhere you can find it. So without further ado, our esteemed guest is Chris Dexter. Chris, I know you well. You're a board member of the Service Council and have been serving in that capacity now for a couple years. Thank you so much for that. But our listening audience might not know you. So maybe a personal introduction and a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the business and your role.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, John. It's nice to be here and to be speaking with you today. And this is kind of a follow-up, really, of a conversation we had a couple of years ago, actually, when we decided to tee up some of these topics. I remember that very well.
Indeed.
So I will probably revisit some of those this time around and give an update on where things are going. Yeah. So I lead a team within Cisco called Customer Experience Application Engineering, and I've been with Cisco for many years, and my work really is in the last 5 or 10 years really moved into the innovation and the incubation area, developing new ways of working, new ways of delivering service, new ways of supporting customers, and helping develop those for our engineers to use, and then gradually move those into the external analytics and AI. And it's been a real journey for us, and so we've got some exciting things in the hopper that are coming up soon as well. So I'm sure we'll unpack those over the next 45 minutes or so.
Absolutely, Chris. And Cisco is a recognizable brand for our audience and for many that are listening. Fortune 100 company, global footprint, very diverse customer set, very diverse customer engagement in terms of the value that's being delivered through that relationship. But for our listening audience, for a little bit more of an introduction to your customer, I'd love for you to spend a minute or two just talking about who is Cisco's customer, um, by organization, the personas you engage with, the types of engagements you're dealing with. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, Cisco, as you said, is a very well-known brand and incredibly diverse from a technology and platform point of view. So you ask our customers are pretty much anybody who consumes IT technology across the spectrum, from networking through to security through to collaboration, and it's very broad and very diverse. And our customers range from kind of government, enterprises, service providers, right down to products which are pitched at that level. So we have a real full spectrum in terms of technology coverage, which means from my point of view, in terms of my role, which is helping our technical support teams create the best experience for their customers. You can imagine our technical support hotlines, we call it our technical assistance center. We get calls from all those different customer types across all the those different dynamic and demanding environment where we're trying to support for those customers on that technology, help them resolve their issues as quickly as possible, help them adopt new features, help them get the best value from what they bought across that huge spectrum of diverse technology and the demanding mix of customers that we have who all have different levels of expectations of the service that we provide, of course. So
Mm.
that's that, and some of the people on the call here will have very similar environments of that type of complexity. Trying to deal with those different dimensions simultaneously is demanding, it's complex, but if you get it right and you get the right experience for the customer, then they'll come back and buy more technology. They'll renew their contracts. They'll be You'll be able to help them service their business better. Great. It's a great place to be at that kind of nexus of the customer experience and the product experience. And we've done some fun things to make that as effective and as innovative as possible.
Outstanding. And we're going to dive into many of those aspects of how you've designed the customer experience in as we go through the discussion. We're battling through a little bit of internet connections, but Chris, we hear you now. We'll continue to plow through this, and I don't know if it's my end or yours, but for our listening audience, apologies if it's impacting your experience, but we'll fight through this and try to clean it up as best we can if there's anything we can do. So, one of the things that the Service Council has been tracking is this trend around the shift to personalization, and more recently we've heard the added hyper personalization built into the evolution of personalization for the customer. And while personalization is tailoring content or experiences based on basic customer data like demographics or purchase history, or what you know about the customer. Hyper personalization takes this to another level where it's dynamic, where you're interacting with, you're using real time data analytics, you're engaging with the customer as they go cross channel and personalizing the experience real time. What are your thoughts on this latest trend? And I have a follow up behind that.
Yeah, it is. It's becoming increasingly important and increasingly relevant customer, to be honest, because they've invested their time and their money and their business commitment with us, and I think we kind of owe it to them to elevate that experience to be as personalized and as valuable as possible. I mean, classically, you're absolutely right. I mean, some of the data points we've used historically have been things which are more traditional around kind of asset information and consumption information, and those things were providing, if you like, a personalization based on the technology context. But it's more than that now. It's about the way that the user wants to be interacted with. So there's language preferences, there's colloquial language preferences, there's information around their journey, their cross-platform journey, which needs to be infused into how you respond in a particular situation. An example would be in the technical support world, you have a customer who's trying to find an answer to a problem, and they navigate environments and what's available publicly to get to a point where they then want to work with technical support, and that journey needs to be brought into that initial experience when they talk to the engineer or where they engage with our AI assistants, and because that knowledge informs how you respond. The last thing you want to do is to repeat conversations and repeat interactions with customers when they've gone through that already. That's a point of frustration. So personalization has a number of, yes, you get this positive experience, but also it's a frustration alleviation. It takes away things which would have traditionally frustrated that experience, and you move through them in a more frictionless way. The other thing, of course, which you can bring in is other contextual information around their kind of feature consumption, for example. How are they using the products, and what can that bring to that personalized experience? And then, of course, you have certain types of customers with certain kind of regulatory requirements. So you can personalize in the within the platform have now. That's become available in a way which it really wasn't a couple of years ago. So that's an absolute trend. That's absolutely a trend, and having that personalization at all levels is, I think, objectively what we all want to be reaching for.
Absolutely. And As we think about the evolution of the customer experience as a continuum, right? We've moved from this proactive customer experience approach to personalization to now hyper personalization, which is this real-time environment where the enterprise is empowered with that real-time data and intelligence to help the customer and personalize the experience in the moment. Is
Yeah.
there something beyond that? Is there another level? Is there a next level beyond that you're thinking about or trending towards?
Yeah, there's a couple of things actually. It's interesting you mentioned that because yeah, it did support. The customer comes to you with a question, you resolve the issue, and then you move forward. That's one thing. And personalization absolutely has a role to play in that standard interaction. But there's a couple of next steps from that, which are kind of a little bit of a further stretch, but actually have a really, really interesting outcome. So the first one is to put that experience, that support experience, the technical support experience, which has classically been through some kind of digital channel or through a call center channel or through a chat assistant or something like that, you would actually put that support experience on the product. So as the customer is using the device itself, as they're working in the UI for that product, the support experience, kind of the access to the things decision to them in the product itself. So it's embedded seamlessly into the UI. And Cisco recently announced at Cisco Live in Melbourne a few weeks ago, our first iteration of this, where the support experience from a technical support point of view is now embedded into the AI assistant on the product, which is really powerful because it means you're not just kind of eliminating swivel chair, which I guess is something that we all want to do in our environments. We don't be going to multiple places. You want to go to a single source because they're experiencing the support in the context of the product they're working on with the issue that they're experiencing right there in front of them. And that future step, which is now becoming reality and is something that we're really going to be moving towards, that I think is transformational because the proximity is, well, you can't really get more proximate than that because you're presenting the solutions and the concepts of the user as they're experiencing the product on the device itself. So that's I think the next step beyond the kind of the generalized personalization. But then you can take it another step further, which is concepts like self-remediation, independent autonomy on the product, providing support and diagnostic information to resolve the issue, but actually resolving the issue independently
Mm.
by identifying it, matching it to a known solution, pushing it back to the user on the device to implement autonomously. So you're actually giving them the opportunity to do that automatically, completely independently. And we've been exploring this in a few different directions. Many of the users listeners on the call today will be, and that's an area that we've really automated deeply within Cisco because we know that if you can identify certain conditions on devices that match known RMA characteristics, you can automate the workflow there in terms of analysis, identification, and shipment. So that's kind of a autonomous remediation workflow because it's completely closed loop. The product and the machine identifies the issue, the conditions are matched. You meanings of a patient from a hardware point of view, looking at it from a software point of view, applying that software fix independently on the product. If the customer trusts us to do that, then we have the capabilities to do that. And with things like the convergence of classical machine learning and generative AI, you can have the best of both worlds because you could have you have a generative interface, but within that you can sort of automate it, which have predictable results. They're deterministic, and matching those two things together is very powerful because then the deterministic actions can be taken on the product autonomously. So you see this kind of journey from helping customers be self-sufficient and automating some of those workflows, pushing it upstream to be proximate on the device, to be near where they are and near where they're having the issues. And then the final step is to be able to remediate the issues autonomously and independently, which is just around the corner in terms of functionality.
Outstanding. Chris, we're going to continue to fight through. We're having a little bit of choppiness in the internet connection that I think is impacting the discussion a little bit for our listening audience. We've gotten some feedback. I'm catching the gist of it, and I'll try and summarize it if there's a pocket again that we encounter of turbulence, if you will. I don't know if there's anything you can trial to get a steadier connection, but if not, we'll just keep plowing through and do our very best here.
Shall I drop and come back in
Why
again?
don't we do that? Why don't we do that? We'll take a brief moment here, and I'm Irish. I can dance a jig here until you come back. So while we wait for Chris to return, one of the recent research surveys the Service Council is conducting, currently in market, it's our annual KPIs and metrics survey. And we asked of a group and set of metrics, what are of keen most priority. And right now we're in preliminary finding status, so we have just eclipsed 50 executive respondents. Cost and productivity metrics is number one right now, leader in the clubhouse, and it's by a wide margin. Now, reflecting year over year, the mindset shift last year was revenue and growth followed by customer. This year it's cost and productivity followed by revenue and growth, currently speaking. Again, preliminary data, 53 respondents, but it is about a 15 or 16 point gap between cost and revenue. So to what degree that will change and evolve over time, that's a compelling data point, currently speaking. We asked what are you expecting with respect to data and technology investments, and on which group of metrics are you expecting your data and technology investments to be most reflected in during 2025? And cost and productivity was once again a large leader in the clubhouse at 70% of the respondent pool. Again, preliminary data followed by revenue and growth at 46%. So a large gap between the two. I'm going to add Chris back into the stage, and maybe I'll share some of that data reflective across our conversation as we continue our journey here. Hi, Chris. Welcome back.
Hey, John. Is that a bit better?
It sounds wonderful. Absolutely. Let's carry on. So we were
apologies
talking
for that.
about.
Do we need to recap on the last topic? Do you think that?
I'd like to go back to that product and service experience convergence that you were talking about. I think it's a really interesting.
So let me just recap then what I was saying, because and apologies to the audience for any kind of interruption there. So John asked me around kind of what's next beyond hyper personalization. And I talked about a couple of things which are really interesting in terms of how we're pushing the support experience upstream into the product, so that as the user is experiencing an issue on the product itself, as they're working on the UI of the product, they're able to access the support experience directly from the product itself, instead of having to swivel chair to other modalities. So you're embedding it right where the user needs it. It's kind of meeting them where they are, is a phrase that we would use there, which is really powerful. Because from a personalization point of view, it's hyper personalization, because it's completely contextually aligned with what that user has experienced on that product at that point. So you can push automation, alerts, analytics, give them assistance in line, and it's seamless. It appears as a kind of a frictionless experience. And we launched this at Cisco Live in Melbourne about 3 weeks ago, and it's a very exciting development where we're really kind of pushing the envelope of what kind of technical support means for Cisco products. So that's kind of the next step beyond that personalization. It's actually putting it precisely, contextually, correctly where the user is experiencing the issue. And the next thing beyond that is something which we're calling autonomous machine remediation, which is basically where you identify an issue and the device self-resolves it by linking together telemetry and diagnostics from the product with the things we know from a support point of view in terms of how to fix things, bringing those two things together using traditional machine learning and generative techniques to create a specific fix for that issue, which can be presented to the customer or implemented autonomously, independently. So that's that kind of real closed loop remediation where you don't need intervention. And we've got some great examples of the beginnings of that already. And I don't know whether you caught me talking about kind of supply chain logistics, but
Yeah.
we've really automated a lot of the RMA and logistics management within Cisco now, so that over 60% of our RMAs are fully automated, which means that we identify conditions on the devices, we automatically assign and approve an RMA, and we ship the product, and that happens automatically. And it really does improve the experience. The customer gets that immediate support. They get that part shipped more quickly. It's right first time. So that concept of that closed loop remediation, we've got that implemented from the supply chain point of view. We're now pushing it into software remediation, which is more complex and somewhat more risky. But actually, I don't quite know where you go beyond that, John. Once you've actually got the device that self-remediates, that's kind of the end state, I think. But then how do you maintain that? And that's where the role of the support engineer really starts to come into play, because creating the knowledge that drives that, creating the intellectual capital, supervising, becoming an SRE DevOps type role, supervising what the remediation does. It's a kind of an evolution as well of what the engineer role is, I think, as well.
You're hitting on something that's really interesting to me. We're about to hold our service leaders agenda webinars, where we look at some of the top critical trends, moving into 2025. And one of the things that I'm going to highlight is this concept of the manufacturing industry being in a state of crisis right now a little bit, right? There's a huge amount of product returns that are happening. They're at an all-time high. If you look at the S&P 500 by market cap, not a single manufacturing company is in the top 10 right now, where in 1999 4 of the top 10 were. And my theory and my hypothesis is that manufacturing operations leaders and executive management are going to start to turn to service more prominently in the new calendar and moving forward, because of this notion of end-to-end asset lifecycle management. And I think that it's a critical inflection time in this journey of asset lifecycle management. And I think the importance of IoT is going to become more and more prominent, right? Because the control of that proprietary data is so important in terms of enabling all the things that you're talking about, but it's also a defense mechanism against your competitors that are offering multi-vendor services against your products, right? So I think that this is a critical time frame, and I think IoT is going to be a real critical technology investment. One of the inhibiting factors that we've heard is, do we retrofit? Do we just do going forward? How do we manage end of life on older assets? But I think that IoT is going to be a real critical investment moving forward, because it has been a limiting factor for sure. Do you have any reactions to that?
Yeah, I agree. And Cisco is in the fortunate position of being, let's say, digitally native. So
Yeah.
our products by nature, you can extract telemetry from them, and that helps you do the things you just described in terms of proactive maintenance, predictive maintenance, looking at kind of proactive RMAs and replacement, kind of health checks and monitoring. So we come from an interesting world where some things we have streaming type telemetry functionality, some things we don't. So we have a hybrid of, let's say, asynchronous telemetry, which is through extraction and monitoring, versus things which are synchronous and real time in terms of real time telemetry. So we have both of those, but we're fortunate to have them, and we do see those as really being underpinning a lot of the things that I've just talked about. So if you do have the ability through an IoT type architecture to have real time telemetry, which gives you conditional machine status and things like that, so you can actually monitor device status proactively, then the things I've talked about, like the triggering the automated RMA, I'll give you an example of how we've done that particular one, which I think is a universal type. It's a universal type solution. So for one of our products, which is called inService, and what inService does is it's a control system that manages lots of different devices, but it has real-time telemetry that collects from those. So we've worked with the engineering team to embed in there the functionality to monitor those conditions. It could be memory failure, things like that. And then from the controller itself to actually trigger the automated RMA. So if your users and your listeners are in the world where you have that IoT telemetry and you've got the ability to monitor those conditional alerts, then you can automate the processes in your own systems. If you go API first with how you build your workflows, then you can actually create these workflows automatically. So one of the things that we've really looked to do is really kind of elevate our systems to allow us to do that end to end, so that you don't have to break that automated RPA cycle. You can just do it from end to end through having APIs into the back end systems and that front end telemetry. So if you can get to that state, then you can do many things around that. It doesn't stop with RMAs and kind of return logistics. It goes beyond that to other things which are more about adoption, around creating value for the product, creating that stickiness, as you talked about, which allows you to retain the business. The more sophisticated you can get, the more proactive you can get, then the better business outcome you'll get from that.
Yeah, Chris, I love this conversation, and I took note of that approach that Cisco is calling autonomous machine remediation. I think that's really interesting, and we'll probably have that in our summary wrap up as a follow up. So, kudos. I love that concept. Can we take a step back, actually? So, we're talking about the real time environment. We're talking about the critical technologies that enable that. Can we actually just revisit Cisco's channels, right? What are the channels of support that customers are engaging in? And then I have a series of follow-ups related to channel in terms of what does Cisco prefer versus the customer? Like where is the customer versus where would Cisco prefer the customer to be? And maybe some things around, that as well. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, we have all modalities available. So from well, let's talk about email in a second, but traditional email input, call center, chat interface, let's say kind of website based, SaaS case management, that kind of thing. So we have all the different modalities available for customers. So and we also have some other things which are a little bit more sophisticated in terms of upstream CRM integrations. So we have e-bonding between some of our major partners and customers to allow us to do ticket synchronization directly through that kind of cloud model, that kind of cloud transactional model. But all channels are available. But what we see and what we hear from customers is really some real clear preferences. And you see it in the measurements, in the metrics, in the statistics around it. You see that when customers are able to self-service through digital channels, the time to resolution is reduced and the customer satisfaction is increased. And it's very clearly correlated, very clearly correlated. So that is clearly a customer preference. When you do have network down situations, of course, you need instantaneous results, you need instantaneous access. So you're always going to need those traditional channels. You need, when you call somebody who will create an action and kind of lean in and intervene, you'll always need that because those critical situations require that. They require that immediacy. But increasingly, the type of things which customers are asking us to do, like, don't just send me a document, tell me how to do this. Those things are actually automated. Those things can be built as workflows, as RPA workflows, and those can be surfaced to the customer however they wish. And we're seeing this kind of move towards, let's say, a chatbot type interface, which is becoming increasingly interesting because that, by expanding that to be using generative techniques and kind of NLP models, you can really make that a very customized interface. So that's a really good one. And what sits behind it, though, are the same things that sit behind the other channels. So whenever you're building this kind of multi-channel, this omni-channel approach, the one thing I would say is, as you architect it, make sure that whichever way the customer interfaces with you, what you're providing as a result from your back-end systems, be it through a recommendation, a workflow, a piece of intellectual capital, make sure it's coming from a consistent route, is anchored in the same place, so that whichever channel they consume it, be it on the product, on the phone, through an IVR, through a chat, through a web page, it's rooted in the same thing. And then customers will find their own preferences. And what we then orientate around is strengthening and enhancing those preferences. And it really is coming into things which are through a chat interface and digital self-service. because we're finding better results for the customer. We can be more precise and accurate. And because we're digital first and we get good telemetry and diagnostic information from our products, we can build the mechanics behind the scenes to digitize our recommendations and then
Yeah.
replay them through different scenarios next time round.
Yeah, and I think that's just wonderful discussion here. I took note of and I'm going to double click on it. Ticket synchronization from the customer to the service provider in
Yeah,
terms of
that's right.
integration of CRMs. I thought that was
Yeah.
really a great thought that you brought here. We're going to circle back to the technologies, and I'm going to revisit that. So hold that thought.
Okay.
But the other thing that I wanted to make comment of is, look, a lot of organizations have gotten omni-channel wrong. Let's be honest, right? And as a consumer, we're all consumers in life. You have that horrible experience in an environment that in one of the channels that you just mentioned, and you lose trust in that channel. And there's a little bit of PTSD in terms of revisiting that channel as you go forward. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
you have to be really careful about getting it right, don't you? What
you
what are your
do. And
thoughts?
that
What are your thoughts on that?
uh, and fundamental things like understanding your customer journey are absolutely foundational to that, because you
Yeah.
can't assume a preference unless you have actual evidentiary data to support that. So you may
Yeah.
wish a customer to go down a certain channel, but if there's no evidence to show that that is a preference and that actually functionally works, then you're
Yeah.
just forcing down a route which will end in frustration. And there's only the tolerance threshold for that is extremely low, extremely low. And
Yeah.
then they will just default to an alternative route which would be less efficient for them.
Yeah.
So I guess the approach we try and take here is to really understand the things which are repeatedly occurring.
Mm.
So if you identify those patterns within the way that you work with your customer, you can take those patterns, and they could be certain steps of actions, or they could be certain data that you need each time. You identify what those patterns of consistency and continuity are, and then you automate them. But you automate them in such a way that when the customer engages with the automation, it feels like they're engaging with the person that they would have done previously.
Ah,
And I'll give you a good example of that, John,
love it.
is a virtual engineer concept that we have. So we have a virtual engineer who is a humanoid type concept. They engage as a person, and it feels like a personal engagement to that end user, but it's actually a set of bots and a kind of machine learning AI functionality that sits behind it. But the beauty of it is that what we create that interface to do, that virtual engineer to do, is based on things which we've already observed customers like.
Mm-hmm.
So by matching those two things together, there's no friction. And we get comments all the time from customers who say that they actually thought it was a real person, because it's been designed so intuitively with that conversational design structure. So that's a long way of saying, I guess, if you can work out across your work, what are the
Mm.
patterns of things that repeat? What are the things which you can steer towards this model and build with that in mind? Then you don't encounter the frustration, John, because what you're
Yeah.
building is something that they would have already done. It's just a completely different modality.
And this is such a perfect segue, Chris, to our next part of the discussion, which is, an ongoing debate which has dominated the hearts of our community is, and service leaders around the world, is, the discussion of a human first versus a digital first approach, right? And our belief is that it's not one or the other, it's both, right? That there is a harmonious balance that can be struck between the two, and it's quite magical when you do strike that balance, and integrate those work streams, if you will, human versus digital and automation. What are your viewpoints on the importance of your people and the service organization and the culture of care that's been built across the organization?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical. I mean, we need to be there for our customers 24/7, whenever they need us, on whatever technology they need us on,
Mm.
because their business is dependent upon that. So that culture of care and trust and doing the right thing is absolutely critical, and it's built into Cisco's technical assistance center's DNA. It really is. very proud of that. Our customer satisfaction scores are some of the highest in the industry. Our kind of repeat customer scores are extremely high. And the deep technical expertise that we have is what enables us to do this, and to be there as kind of if like the last line of defense when the customer can't get things to work, they call us. So that's hugely important for us. And the people part of it, the expertise, and the culture of customer first is what sits behind that. So
Absolutely.
we're absolutely very proud of that. And you said something very interesting. It's not about one or the other. It's about what's right for that point in time.
Yep.
And if the customer needs to talk to an engineer, they will talk to an engineer, and we will.
Absolutely.
And that channel is always available. If they want to go engineer first, that's always available. But if the customer has a preference for going down a route which is automated, which provides them a known answer quickly to save them doing their research, to save them having to do their own digging around, we want to steer them towards that wherever we can, because we know empirically through the data that it's solved quicker and they get the answer, the right answer first time, and they feel empowered by that. So it's a kind of a way of it's quite a subtle way of creating engineer empowerment, because the engineer on the customer side feels that they'll be able to resolve the issue independently. So that empowers them, and they will be able to do it the next time themselves. So it's kind of an educational outcome as well in some respects. But that doesn't get away at all from. So let's kind of take a slightly different approach. So you've got human, you've got digital, you've got human plus digital, because the things I'm talking about are techniques to also enhance the way that our engineers work, to speed up their own work. I'll give you an example of that. So what we try and do wherever possible, whenever we have a diagnostic file that's given to us, which could be thousands of lines of code. So we want to analyze that, and we want to analyze it using these machine systems, and give the results to our engineers, so they have some immediate analysis in front of them as to what the root cause could be. Now, that previously would have been done through the engineer analyzing the data, but now through these machine systems that we built over many years, we can expedite that. So we can immediately give them insights as to what the issue could be at that point. So that's really the machine augmentation alongside the engineer. So the engineer's insight and the machine's analysis, and those two things coming together, that's a magical thing, I think, and that probably gives the best experience if you've got really complex situations, or a situation where the customer is really relying on you to do something fast because they have a critical outage. Those things are just hugely important. And also, what I will say is that you can't really automate something that hasn't happened before. So you need evidence of an outcome before you can automate in a deterministic way. You can do things which are self-learning, of course, and we're exploring those concepts as well. But the most powerful thing is when something has happened before, you've digitized that sequence of things that gets your results, and then you feed that back to the customer to be independent. And that's really powerful. And that, I think, where most, if they're honest with themselves, most customers would rather that and have that feeling of empowerment. And I think that's going to be a big chunk of what the future looks like.
Absolutely, you're hitting upon what I was going to revisit based on your earlier commentary, which was on what you learned from the customer journey and looking for those patterns, and looking for the patterns of consistency, and then seeking to automate and creating as human of an experience as possible. Are there any other learning moments that you've gathered in terms of those patterns, or finding those patterns, or perhaps moving beyond just identifying the patterns and actually implementing change efforts in terms of connecting the dots between human and digital automation?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I think is really interesting for any kind of organization from a support and service point of view that deals with large scale issues on a continuous basis, being able to identify those things which are common and happen continuously or consistently, and then codifying them. So it's like you will, and each organization will have to find their own answer to this, but if you can solve for the codification of that into something which is a logical structure that you can then use as a library to augment and assist other ways of doing things, that's really powerful. Traditional knowledge management, as as it used to be is kind of history. No one's searching for documents anymore. It's extracting insights from those documents using generative techniques. It's establishing patterns and coding them into logical sequences that can be reused by machine learning models. That's kind of the future here. And if you can find a way to take your traditional knowledge set and transform it into that, then you can take the next step towards automation and then ultimately an enhanced AI experience.
Yeah.
But you probably need to do the first thing first, because that's the foundation for all of it, I think.
Yeah. 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 That's a great discussion there. And, the contextualizing of the data, the standardization of data, the codifying it, and taking data on a journey of being raw to sorted to contextualized to personalized to hyper personalized is such an interesting journey. And I want to get to the technology platforms that Cisco has deployed, either by category of technology or even the specific partners you're using that have enabled some of these environments you're creating, because it's quite an impressive journey. Can you talk a little bit about what is the magic behind all this from a technological standpoint?
What's the magic behind it? Well, I will say that we're a digital native company. We're a company of
Mm,
developers. So a lot of the stuff, John, is homegrown. And it's homegrown for a good reason, actually, because there were some things which are very specific to our environment. I mean, your listeners will have exactly the same thing. You'll have specific things with your environment where they need to be done in a certain way. But actually, what we've done across the board
mm,
is we've used industry standards. So we may have built something which is specifically engineered for our environment, but it's
mm-hmm,
very much standards based. It's always API first. We have
mm-hmm,
standardized UI design specifications that we use, so
mm-hmm,
kind of common look and feel. So we very much try to treat this from as a product engineering perspective, actually. So we organize our innovation, we incubate the innovation, and then we translate that into systems that then scale. And we build it in such a way that they can be connected together, which is really important, because often organizations fall into the trap of building point solutions for specific things.
mm-hmm.
But actually, very few things in reality are point specific things. Most of them are part of a connection of things across systems or across
Yeah,
products. So you have to build in such a way that you can then connect those into a greater whole. So
sure.
that's a deliberate engineering position that we've taken over the years, so that as you build a new concept, a new tool to do X or a new feature to do Y, that it's part of that ecosystem, and it can be
Yep.
connected in to use the same data, the same orchestration layer, the same API layer,
Sure.
etc. So it's part of a system. But yeah, so I mean, we obviously we partner with CRM providers for our SaaS ticket management systems like Salesforce and ServiceNow and
Mm-hmm,
Jira and all those other kind of common kind of SaaS systems which many of our users will be using. So I mean, that layer is certainly something that we use
mm-hmm,
external vendors for. But a lot of this innovation work that I talked about, because we're in the fortunate position of being digitally native, we can do this ourselves. However, as I look around, and for the listeners who are looking to go on a vendor strategy with this, or a partnership strategy with other technology vendors, there are lots of companies that do these functions. If you're
mm-hmm,
looking for kind of chatbot development or anomaly detection or data analysis or kind of real-time streaming or data instantiation and abstraction. There's lots of companies that do this, which you can fit together and create your own ecosystem to do this. My recommendation would be that to think through how you want this to work end to end, and
mm,
point solutions may address a specific issue, but if you can build a system that actually creates a uniform approach to this across all the different stages of the workflow or the
mm-hmm.
end state you want to get to, then that's much more powerful. It's tougher to do with a multi-vendor strategy.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been lucky we can do this ourselves, but the concept is not unachievable. And if you can do that, then you can create something I think that's really unique to your environments.
You just said something that actually takes us in the next direction of the conversation, which is our research still points and signals to a lingering issue with respect to disparate databases and disintegrated technologies, and while the vision for that end-to-end life cycle has been considered, the integration of the technologies to create a seamless experience across that entire life cycle has been a little bit less than. Um,
Yeah.
how has Cisco addressed this? What is the approach taken there? Thinking big, thinking end to end, thinking
Yeah.
pointed, but then thinking integrated.
Well, I'll tell you, it's speaking again from the support environment,
Mm,
which is kind of the theme today. It's been a journey, so this doesn't happen overnight. So we started
yeah.
this probably 7, 8 years ago. In
Hmm.
terms of, and the first thing we looked at was this knowledge codification concept.
Yep.
So we built from that. It's not something that you can turn on overnight. You absolutely need to harmonize your data sets. You need to have a really clear understanding of your workflows and the systems that are dependent on those workflows, and then identify areas where you need to tune that. It might be, for example, that you need to create an environment where you've got multiple systems using different data sources. You might need to have multiple systems using a single data source, and you unify in
Hmm.
that. It might be that the UXs and the UIs for the different systems are different. Therefore, people get confused or there's conflicting information. You might need to unify that. But really look closely at what your people do and why they do it and what the outcomes are, and then build the systems around that. Don't What we've tried to avoid doing is building a technology and then looking for a use case. It has to be the other way around. Has
Yeah.
to be. The use case has to define what you build, and it needs to be directly connected. It can't kind of come up with a set of requirements, build something that kind of fits, and then give it back to the user and say, there you go. That just doesn't work. It has to be a partnership to get it right. And if you can get it right, then you'll get people to use it. You'll get the results you need, but
Yeah.
also then you'll get innovation on the top of it. Because
Yeah.
if people like what's been built, let's say you built something which is helping you do advanced analytics, your engineers who are at the front line dealing with your customers are the best people to tell you what needs to be added to those systems. They're the
Absolutely.
best people. So if you can field source or crowdsource concepts and ideas from the people who are doing the work, that's when you get real brilliant stuff. If I look at the catalog of things that we run in our technology stack, pretty much everything has come from an engineer somewhere working with a customer having a light bulb moment, and it's flowed through and it's been consolidated and built into these systems. But those ideas come from our brilliant engineers who are doing the work because they're closest to knowing what the customers and what they need themselves. And also
Absolutely.
they've also got a level of technical knowledge around the environment which allows them to innovate. So really cultivate that. My recommendation would be your best asset is the people doing the field facing work, because
Here,
they're
here.
closest to the business.
Absolutely. We couldn't agree more. And I think that there's still room for improvement for listening and taking action based on what you're learning from the front
Yeah.
line. We do an annual Voice of the Field Service Engineer survey. And because of its popularity, we launched a Voice of the Contact Center Agent survey behind it. It's currently in market, actually. The Field Service Engineer survey has amassed over 10,000 engineers and technicians over the last 5 years that have responded to it. This year's our first edition of the Contact Center survey, and will eclipse 1,000, which is really exciting.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
but the data still points and signals that there's room for improvement, whether it's perception or reality. The front line still does not feel like their feedback is enacted upon, and so and they also feel like they might be out of the innovation loop. And to your point, they can be the greatest source for innovation. So I love
Oh,
that
they
message.
absolutely are. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not could be. It's the evidence over the years has absolutely proved that. Absolutely proved. And you need to keep those channels open. You need to run hackathons. You need to run innovation events. You need to stimulate that. You need to get ambassadors and advocates within your organizations who stimulate that locally within your teams, and create the channel to bring that back to wherever your development function is. And that development function needs to not be protective about what it's doing. It needs to
Yeah.
embrace new ideas and recognize the fact that sometimes HQ functions aren't the best people to make decisions on what's best for the engineers in the field.
Absolutely.
So
Yep. Yep.
Do with that
And you,
comment what you will, but I think we all need to recognise the importance of the voice of the field.
No, I think it's a humble comment, and I think it's a great approach. So kudos. You mentioned something, the innovation that happens on top of it, the
Yeah.
technology platforms, right? Um, w- what's next for Cisco? What are some of the things that are hot on your plate for consideration for this coming year and maybe even beyond? What are you tracking towards?
Well, so from a support environment point of view, obviously the impact of generative AI. So
Yeah.
we have a long kind of roadmap of and backlog of concepts around enhancing the engineer experience using these techniques, and
Hmm.
it's a combination of generative and classical because you need to have both of those machine learning and AI techniques working together.
Indeed.
Generative AI is not the solution for everything. Generally, it's not. It's the solution for some things, and it's a wrapper for other things. But there's a whole body of work which is around deterministic problem solving, which is not the generative use case. It never will be. So those two things absolutely need to coexist. So finding the way to marry those things together in the right way is absolutely a focus this year, and really get that enhancing our engineers' experience, and then making that available to our customers directly, so they can interact with these techniques directly, independently, and self-service. So that whole kind of trajectory is kind of what we're on, and then moving into the personalization space, enhancing
Mm.
that, and then
Hmm.
ultimately exploring what it means to have self remediation, and that's kind of the progression I think that we're on, and all of it is extremely feasible. It gets
Yep.
down to, just go back to the point you made earlier, actually, about disparate systems, because each company on this call, each will have a technical debt of systems they have over the years, which they just have
Hmm.
to work with.
Yep.
If you can step back from that and look and take a systems approach to how you architect your underlying technology that your people use, if you can get a systems approach and you can push through that, then it does become very powerful, and you can accelerate. So these things we talked about can be accelerated by
Yep.
having a systems approach. If it's not, then you you're kind of dragging yourself, you're slowing yourself down, and it
Yeah.
becomes harder to implement, and you become dependent on things which are um, kind of separate integrations which add to that technical debt, and it becomes like a snowball. There's a bit of a reset is probably necessary in some cases. If you're going to exploit this technology in the best way,
Yep.
a bit of a reset to your systems architecture is probably necessary to do it
Yeah. And
to the best way.
you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. And a precursor to our upcoming webinar on the top predictions for next year, another prediction that I have is that incumbent technology platforms are not safe. That there's a revisiting of whether or not previous decisions and the accumulation of technical debt was the right decision. Is it going to scale with the business, with
Yeah,
how the business is moving and evolving? And in some cases, we're hearing that the answer is no. And so we're seeing displacement strategies that are happening more commonly, which is an interesting trend from our point of view.
yeah,
Chris,
yeah, for sure.
we're rounding the bend here, and we are so humbled to have you as a board member. I'm so glad we had the opportunity to get you here on this podcast, and we've shared the digital stage on more than one occasion. We've been on webinars and et cetera. Um, your board contributions have been many. Thank you. Really appreciate it. What value do you get from your board role?
It's really the insights, John. It's invaluable. I mean, the kind of information that you collect. You talk about the voice of the field engineer, the voice of the contact center. Those are invaluable and somewhat unique, actually. So
Yeah,
that's super helpful. It really is. I mean, because sometimes all of us, if we're working kind of heads down in our internal environment, that outside in perspective maybe doesn't come across our desk as much as we would like.
yeah, yeah,
So when it does, it is really valuable. So and it gives a an opportunity to think differently as well, because we all get
yeah,
locked into a certain way of doing things. I mean,
yeah,
Cisco's as guilty as anybody. So that taking a step back, taking an industry-wide perspective, looking for those micro trends or those nuggets that maybe you haven't seen and that you want to pick up on, that's super helpful. So well, this kind of forum is just super for that. So no, it's
Wonderful.
truly valuable. It really is.
Outstanding. Thank you for those positive comments. And maybe for our listening audience, we've gotten to know you on the business level, and your journey here at Cisco. Maybe something about yourself, personal, something you're looking forward to, something about yourself personally for our listening audience to get to know you a little better.
Well, we were chatting just before the call. My kids are
Yeah.
all grown up, but they're coming back for Christmas. So I'm certainly looking forward to
Yay.
seeing them over the festive period. So yeah, they
Absolutely.
still come home even though they're older now, which is no, which is always good. So yeah, that's something I'm looking forward to.
Outstanding. Yeah, I have one that still believes in Santa Claus. So I'm going to hold on to that for
Wow.
as long as I possibly
Hold
can.
on to that.
So.
Seriously, my friend. It's because when it's gone, it's gone.
Outstanding. Well, he is Chris Dexter from Cisco. What an interesting discussion. We will be summarizing our discussion in some post event activities. This podcast will be available for consumption on all the different channels on our website, on LinkedIn, on all the podcast streams that you subscribe to, where you get your podcast. It'll be there. Chris, I really enjoyed this discussion. We're going to have to do this again because I'd like to double click on some of the concepts you shared with us today. This has been outstanding. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Sean.
All
Thank you
right,
very much.
for
Nice to
all for
hear.
those listening, happy holiday season. I think this is our last podcast for the year. Maybe not. I might be misspeaking. If not, we'll see you once more. But enjoy the holiday season. I know this time of year can be stressful for many, and we're wishing you just positive thoughts and a wonderful experience for this time of year with friends and family. And thank you for joining. We'll see you on the next podcast event. Cheers.